All right, hello and welcome to the Strategy Gamer podcast. Today we are going to have Herpical Omnicron 5, YouTuber, Let's Player, and all-around strategy gamer. Hey, say hello, Herp.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, well today we are going to be talking about Europa Universalis 4, Europa Yo Mama. This is a Paradox game, been around for a while now, has a ton of DLC, and covers the globe from the New World to the Old World to the Far East. So Herp, if somebody has never played Europa Universalis, how do you wrap it up in a nutshell?
Think of Risk, but with every house rule you could imagine being put on.
Yeah, that kind of sums it up. Yeah, I know, I kind of look at it like what Civ would be if you added about a dozen layers and then made it a good game.
And then took away the personalities.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I kind of miss with, you get some personality, but they bring up, you can hire an advisor, and I really don't know my European history from that period terribly well, so I don't even know who half these people are.
Me neither. However, I have to say one thing, one of the later DLCs, I think it was Rights of Man that added it, actually brought back ruler personalities, which is good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it gets you a little more flavor to the game and a little bit more to get absorbed into it, and it kind of takes the edge off of all of the 0.3% to this and 10% to that.
And I feel like that's really the direction that Europa Universalis 4's DLC structure has actually taken, just adding more flavor to the base game.
Which is cool because, I mean, you get into it and sometimes you really don't know what happens when you get, 0.3% national unrest. It doesn't mean a lot if you're not familiar with the game.
Yeah, but you do get what a bumbling buffoon as your head of state will do to everything.
Yeah, and it's, I haven't played it in a while, and then I fired it up and I got about 40, 50 hours into a game, and I did have a bumbling buffoon, and everything was going great, and then his buffoonery really got into things, and things started going really poorly. So it felt good, it felt right, it felt like it should, like I had an idiot.
Yeah, and that is, I think, up until all that was added in, the greatest loss from CK2 to EU4, Crusader Kings 2.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I mean, CK2 is one of the games that once I kind of sat down and put the time into it, it was like 200 hours later and I just couldn't stop playing it. I mean, it was, because the people had personality. It wasn't just nation states, it was some individual duke that was going balls to the wall crazy.
Yeah, while Europa Universalis 4 seems to want to model the issues of lots of conquest and decentralization of large empires on a global level, the Crusader Kings 2 model of different personalities, cultures, and races coming together in your empires, I feel like the latter works better than the former.
Yeah, I especially for getting immersed into the game. I mean, I can understand from the historical standpoint, you can look at it and say, well, one was the era of vassals and feudalism, and another one was when modern nation states were getting formed. But it just seems like you missed that interaction.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it wasn't until the Rights of Man, I swear it's this expansion, that expansion adding in stuff like Parliament for the UK. And that adds a lot more depth by giving some internal politics, but they don't go far enough, in my opinion.
I've never played the UK in the game. I've kind of gone around the periphery and the edges and never really jumped in. So I guess I'm not real familiar with the Parliament mechanic. What does it add that you do like?
So you get to choose something to be debated in Parliament for, I think it's a period of 5 years. And during that debate period, you can go round to each of the different counties that have a seat in Parliament, and they'll want you to do a certain thing, such as let their nobles or their politicians have better place in the military, let their sons get better place in the military, which costs you army tradition, or you can give them more automatism so that they pay less taxes, or something like that. And the way it works is you just push a button, and it has some flavor text, but it's just minus 5% of this, plus 10% of that, and it's all negative. There are no bribes or negotiations that actually end up benefiting you in any way, but the bonuses that you can get, such as, I think one's minus 50% army maintenance, is huge. It's massive.
No, I like the way that sounds because it gives you an interesting decision without it just being a click button, pay money, get reward.
Yeah, it is a bit of an interesting decision, but it has been mathematically solved, is the issue. And when you put politics in your game, making it mathematically solvable kills the political element and replaces it with just another set of push button, and you have a bunch of scales now to push buttons on.
Oh, that's a bummer. So there's some Reddit guide that says push this, then push that, and then 5 years later you get this.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but I guess, every system can't be perfect, but it sounds like a pretty good start. Hopefully they build on that for other nations as well.
Unfortunately, and I think this is my biggest issue with the development style of EU4, is that the internal politics, whoever the leader is, I forget his name. Is it Johan for EU4?
I don't know if Johan is the lead on that one or not.
Anyway, he is much more combat focused, I remember reading. Really likes wars and stuff. So the internal politics that was added in with the enclaves, or was that CK2? One of them is conclaves, the other is enclaves.
Oh, yeah. Conclaves is CK2, so enclaves with an E must be Europa Universalis.
Right, so the enclave mechanic was meant to introduce some internal politics, but that was a bit of a flop. Rights of man with the parliament, some more internal politics, but it's kind of existing separate to the enclave system rather than on top of it, which I found a bit odd.
Well, it sounds like a document and data control issue. One team building something parallel to another and the two don't mesh well.
Yeah, something like that. It's an annoyance for sure.
That's interesting. But it's interesting you brought up the combat as well, because that I just got through a rather big stomp between Spain and France. And a lot of it felt really, really good until the New World came in, and suddenly we're shuttling 60, 80,000 troops across the Atlantic, and it just kind of felt ahistorical.
That is actually my biggest problem with the game as a whole, because with EU4, you have a game that tries to model the entire world and the issues with colonial conquest and globe-trotting empires. But one of the biggest issues was transporting an army across the Atlantic and across the Pacific. And it turns out that's not an issue at all. You get, 10% attrition for moving across?
Yeah, and it didn't feel like that big of a penalty. And then even when you were there, say you wanted to conquer, I think Itza is the name of the Mexican nation. I mean, what did the Spanish do it with? It was like 500 guys or something like that. And, you just don't get that same vibe.
Yeah, you don't have any kind of depth with dealing with the natives either. You don't hire them, turn them against each other, accidentally spread plagues to them, or on purpose spread plagues to them. You don't do any of that. You just march your big doom stack and win a war.
Yeah, and it's one thing I was kind of bummed with. I'm in the colonial period in Colombia, and I got a stack of just like 2,000 troops. I think, 2 infantry regiments. And you just move in the neighboring province, you click a button, you pay some, 2 points of military power, and suddenly that entire province is just sanitized of natives. And it just kind of, I don't know, it just didn't feel as deep as a lot of the other areas did. Like they're missing out on something.
Definitely. And when such a core element of your game is colonization, the colonization rush, it just feels like Victoria 2 somehow did it better, and it didn't focus on it as much.
Yeah, that's it. Victoria 2 is not a game I've really spent a lot of time with. Just it has a daunting reputation. But have you ever done the CK2 to EU4 to Vic and go through everything?
I've tried that, and my only issue with it is I can never make it through an entire game of CK2.
I'm kind of in the same, mostly because my computer just gets so slow by the end of it that, and then at a certain point you kind of meet your goals and it's like, well, how much harder do I want to have to work to take over the neighbors?
And I think that actually segues nicely onto what I think is the biggest advantage of EU4 to CK2. And that's that whilst you don't have the character personalities that CK2 does, you have the nation's history creating your events. And that means Paradox have a lot more room to make game-changing or just little flavor events that relate closely to the nation you're playing.
Yeah, I would agree. With Spain, I had a lot of really cool stuff popping up, and one thing I kind of missed is it's CK2. You'll have a Wikipedia link on some of the characters where you can actually go read about them. So I'd get some treaty, and it would be the Treaty of Tordesillas, and I have no idea what this is, but they're making it sound like, man, this is really a big deal. But I had no idea. So like a Wikipedia link really would have been, kind of nice to click that and read over and get lost in the history.
Yeah, and stuff like the Iberian wedding, for example, it would be nice to not only have a Wikipedia link to see how it played out in history, but it would also be nice if they were more transparent about what triggers these events in-game, instead of having to go onto the EU4 wiki itself.
I saw mention of it, and it's funny you bring that up because the Iberian wedding didn't happen with me. We end up placing Aragon into a personal union and eventually just integrated them, but that whole event chain never happened.
Huh. I always find Spain games to be an absolute pain without that event firing.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like a slog, like you were taking this and you're taking that, and then Morocco's giving you trouble, and you got pirates in Tunis, but it ended up just kind of coming together. So when you play EU4, I mean, how do you play it? Do you just pick a fun nation? Do you pick a big nation? Do you try to remake Rome? I mean, what's your goal when you sit down for a game?
My goal is always to kind of push whatever I choose as far as I can with a set strategy. For example, what if I want to make France a naval superpower? Or England, I want to conquer Europe with England, sod the New World. I'll blockade the New World from everyone else. No one can have it. Let's leave them be. Let's just conquer Europe and let the natives do their native thing. And then I go over and, oh god, everything's Japan now.
I have not played Ming. I have not played Near Japan, any of that. But it's interesting you bring up trying to rewrite history because for a game that tries to be historical, I guess it makes a fun stage to try to make things ahistorical.
Yeah, I very much am fond of taking countries in the opposite direction of how things played out, because I like to see them not playing necessarily to their strengths as dictated by their national focuses and their ridiculous buffs in the case of France with Elan and stuff. I'd much rather push something that isn't as likely to happen, that the AI would never do.
That's the thing that I always love about Paradox games is when the AI does something so retarded that it's just brilliant. You see it in CK2 where all of a sudden Israel takes over half the map, and it's just those beautiful, crazy moments that really cement the game for me.
Do you feel that's more or less likely in EU4?
So far, I have seen less madness in EU4, but it might be happening, though, and I'm just not recognizing it. I mean, my latest game, we had a Catholic England and a Protestant Scotland, and Scotland was just whooping down, and then I just look up, and then it's all Ireland. So it was like, whoa, like what happened there? But I haven't seen like the clown car roll in and just like take over half of Europe.
You see, this is probably another one of my sticking points with EU4, that there aren't enough variables in motion to allow for crazy things to happen. You look at EU4 and you see a whole bunch of numbers everywhere, but really they don't mean that much in the grand context of things. That's why I actually really like the modding scene for EU4, the mods that add in all of those variables that make the crazy things happen, such as I was playing MEIOU and Taxes, or New and Taxes 2.0, and Wallachia, or Wallachia, however it's pronounced, conquers pretty much all of Italy.
Well, and that's historically ridiculous, but that's so fun. I mean, it's like what's happening here? What is this ridiculousness?
Yeah, so I ended up looking into why that happened, and that's because there were a whole bunch of hell wars going on throughout Europe, including in Spain, where I was playing the War of Three Peters. And so population were fleeing from those areas to somewhere more stable, Wallachia. And then they ended up having a booming production populace. And that populace brought in so much money, they could just hire a ton of mercenaries and conquer Italy.
And that sounds right. That sounds like something you'd read in the history book and go like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. It feels right.
Yeah, an exodus of the people to a safe country, and that safe country using its vast power to conquer places. That sounds actually straight out of Victoria too.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty cool. I mean, is that the mod you most often play with, or are there other ones that you really enjoy?
There is another one that I absolutely love, and that's Imperium Universalis. It's just straight EU4, but they have it's a total conversion taken into Roman times.
Oh, really? Well, that sounds interesting. How does that work out?
It has, it just plays like normal EU4, but it features Rome centrally, and you just conquer stuff. Events happen. I just now had the Spartacus event chain fire up, and slaves were rising up everywhere, and it was a nightmare to put down.
No, I imagine you have Gaul, and you must have Celtic British, and all of the Abyssids and all that.
Yep, and good old Carthage. Oh, right. Carthage.
Well, that's really cool. You mentioned that because wasn't there kind of a infamous Paradox game that involved Rome?
I believe that's one of the earlier Europa Universalis titles.
Okay, I've not played it. I think I've seen it listed, and then everybody said no, don't go there.
Yeah, I've also not played it. The earlier Europa Universalis titles were basically digital board games, from what I've heard.
Well, that's an okay niche given the what's going on, but I'm glad they've leveraged the processing power to give us a little more uniqueness. But that Imperium mod really sounds cool. Personally, I don't play with any mods. I usually pick a nation or a little area and kind of do the same thing. Usually, in the case with Spain, I said, well, I'm going to follow things historically until it's not fun anymore, and then I'll start getting a little ridiculous.
Yeah, that's the way to go, in my opinion.
Because the game seems to, if you kind of stay on the rails a little bit, you get some events and everything seems to work. And I kind of wondered if that's why the Iberian Union didn't really get going, because maybe I differed from the expected path.
The way that works is, I believe you have to be rivals with Aragon, and they need a queen, and you need a king. Or they are in a regency council. It's something like that.
Okay, well, I'll have to kind of look back and see where it was at. I know somebody died at a young age, so maybe that threw a monkey wrench in things.
Yeah, that's probably it. It's a lot of spinning plates, and I'm actually quite surprised that it's an event that triggers so frequently.
Well, that's interesting. I know sometimes events will pop up and it'll be, Austria has chosen this, like it's significant, and a lot of the time it doesn't really mean anything. But that one, at least I've been familiar enough to know it's there, even if I haven't triggered it. But,
yeah.
Okay.
One of the earliest ones like that you mentioned, it's Poland's event. We need a Jagiellon, or choose one of the nobles, and that can either lead to making the Commonwealth a great superpower, or just Poland by itself.
That's interesting, because in my current game, it's Commonwealth, which is this ridiculous monster of a great power. So that's interesting, because other games I've just seen Poland, and I've never played it, so I wasn't aware. So I guess, I mean, that makes it pretty cool that you have so much variance in the game just from a couple of choices in the very beginning.
The only issue that I have with that is one option is so obviously superior to the other, and it's weighted in such a way, I think it's 80% of the time they'll pick Jagiellon, which creates the Commonwealth, and 20% they pick the other one. So I like that as an idea, but my big desire with variance is something that they achieved with Hearts of Iron 4, and that's that all paths, while not equal, are both interesting in their own way to the nation playing.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I always like it when you have two bad decisions, and one is slightly less bad than the other, but maybe not in the same way. So you really can't compare apples to apples. It's makes it a unique choice then.
Yeah, that is definitely what I prefer to see in decision-based games.
Yeah, because anytime it's like, well, do you want good or bad? It's like, well, obviously I want the good stuff, unless you're looking for some flair. But I've had a few events fire in EU4 where something pops up, and it's like, well, choice A is bad, but choice B is bad. And then you kind of got to dig into the mechanics a little bit and says, well, do I want to lose this advisor, but maybe not lose the bonus, or vice versa, which makes it a little more exciting.
The issue with those events is that oftentimes it isn't communicated how good or how bad it is for you. You'll have to get a note and some paper and a pen to write down the numbers and compare them and calculate some things, because the game doesn't do it for you. For example, there's one event that either weakens your trade power in a node or decreases your mercantilism. I have no clue off the top of my head what each point of mercantilism gives me, and I don't know how that would have a knock-on impact on my global trade power. And also, I don't have the numbers of the trade power and the trade value in that node until I move the window away and scroll down on my trade screen to see.
Yeah, and that's kind of going against the paradox model. Normally, that anything you hover over, you get a really nice tooltip that will tell you exactly, oh, if you send your ships here, this is the amount of money you're going to make. Which, to tell you the truth, I ran into a similar event, and the first thing I did was hover my mouse over all the stuff, hoping it was going to tell me, hey, dum-dum, this is what you got to do.
But the issue is, even then, it never tells you exactly how things work. On the trade screen, it doesn't tell you what each ship is contributing, for example, and it doesn't say, it doesn't tell you if it's calculating profit that you'll make based on ships already in that node, or just this fleet that you're considering to take to that node. And you don't know if it's better to spread your trade value. In fact, trade is just terrible.
Yeah, it's definitely a system that can use some love. Now back to the numbers. Do you think everything should be given a number, or do you think there should be some mystery to the choices?
Now, that is highly debatable. I feel like mystery is good for a first playthrough, but if you're doing an Iron Man run, or any kind of challenge run specifically, that just feels annoying. Of course, you're going to alt-tab and see what's better, or what leads to the better chain of events, or if it's best just cut your losses and ignore that.
I suppose in today's wiki universe, even if you don't know the right answer, you can, like you said, alt-tab over, go hit Reddit, go hit the wiki, and somebody will tell you. So they're just cutting the middleman out.
Yeah, I feel like obscuring mechanics for the sake of just creating mystery works in a narrative game. And there you have the debate of, is it a narrative of your nation, or is it a strategy game where your goal is to conquer things?
I suppose. In one, the numbers are of utmost importance, and the other, the narrative is. So the choices become terribly different from one to the other.
Yeah, and I think that is probably the biggest issue Paradox have had with considering how to design EU4 following on from CK2, because CK2 is entirely about the character and the narrative, but EU4 is not.
Oh, I would definitely agree with that. Now, to get back to trade, I mean, I like trade. I like the idea of trade. One of my favorite games I played years ago was called Patrician, kind of this Hanseatic League trade game. And a lot of the time it's like, okay, here's this cool thing, and I stick a manufacturing there, or a plantation, but it kind of just feels a little hollow, like it really should have a lot more depth to it.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Patrician is also one of my favorite series of games up until 4 ruined things. But
Yeah.
with the whole trade system, I feel like they really made a massive misstep because you've got so many famous trade-related events and characters in the time period, like Marco Polo, for example.
Yeah, and even just to see Venice and Genoa and even some of the Hanseatic League, every so often they'll pop up and you'll see them for a minute, but they really don't seem to wield the same power that a lot of the Borgias and the families back then typically did wield, especially over Rome.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that is that it's not modeled as commodities. It's not modeled as trade goods. It's modeled as just gold, which is something else that Victoria 2 did better.
Yeah, and I always kind of felt like you should be able to like corner the market. If you've got all the cocoa, why can't you do something to manipulate that market to suddenly make cocoa worth a ridiculous amount of money? I've had events that pop up that give you, a 50% benefit, but suddenly shutting down half of your plants and choking off of the supply, it doesn't really seem to modify anything. If anything, you're worse off.
Yeah, and you don't get any cost to running your trade goods stuff. Your population doesn't handle anything. You don't have to guide your population to doing anything. No, you own the province, you get that trade good, it goes into the trade node, it's converted to cash immediately. It's not converted on arrival.
Yeah, one thing I also thought was kind of odd was I had one province I took that went to the Caribbean trade node instead of whatever the one by Colombia was, which basically meant that I got no money. France took it all because they had the Caribbean. So I had a disincentive to, you can't reroute it. You can't get it away from that node. That's just where it goes.
To be fair, I kind of get that as, we only have so many routes charted. But then the game contradicts itself on that by letting you just chart a path through any sea tile, which is a weakness, actually.
Yeah, and especially, they point out the trade winds. Hey, here's the trade winds. This is where it goes. And that was one of the big things. You could leave Spain, go south, catch the trade winds, and then you could get to South America or the Caribbean ridiculously quick. Where if you had to take that same route and go from Spain to Nova Scotia, you're going to have to beat against the winds the entire way and against the current.
Yeah, and the game does nothing with those mechanics on any real level.
I saw something where it said, well, we'll give it to you a little bit quicker, but it just didn't feel like, that was a big deal back in the day. Attrition, and it just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel quite right.
Yep, I am with you 100% on that.
Well, hopefully we'll see a future DLC add a little bit more depth, and, I guess if a person doesn't like it, they can always just turn it off.
Yeah, or do what they did with CK2, and instead of make you have to toggle DLC off, just toggle everything in an options menu in the game. Simple naval versus advanced naval, for example.
That's a really good point, especially with the Shattered Army retreat. I remember that was quite a sticking point with a lot of people. I think that was what brought in that menu.
Yep, and I also really wish there was an option to toggle the sailors mechanic off, because it adds nothing to the game.
Yeah, I would agree. It's like you're worried about they give you a number, but it doesn't really, I've never run out of sailors. It just never happened. Maybe if I only had one province, I guess, I don't know. It feels weird.
I've run out of sailors when I was building a ton of trade ships as naval France. But I then looked and I realized, hang on, the French Royal Navy is the one that's hiring all the sailors for its trade ships.
Which just seems weird. And I mean, historically, Britain, War 1812, one of the biggest things was Britain, what was the term where they would take American sailors and force them to sail in the British Navy.
Yeah, press ganging.
Yeah, press ganging, that's exactly it. And it's just like, that was a pretty major thing. And I just like, nope, I ain't got to worry about it. I got this huge navy. I still got plenty of dudes.
Yeah, there's no pressing. There's no need to really train up good captains because they don't make decisions in combat. You do. Admirals and stuff and commanders, they just add dice.
Which is unfortunate because, I mean, especially the era of Patrick O'Brien and, that Royal Navy, I mean, there's so much history there that they could build upon.
There really is. And I really feel like the abstraction of commanders and admirals has always been the worst thing that Paradox has done in all of its time.
Yeah, it does feel like a shallow decision. You're just going to take the guy, you're going to pay the 50 military power and just go with it.
Yeah, controversial opinion. I think Hearts of Iron 3 did Chains of Command best, because whoever you put in your order of battle and set to do war, they'd have some traits that would make them do war in a different way. And that's brilliant.
That is a good point, even though the mechanism itself to shift it all around was terrible. But I do agree, it was neat to see there was an impact up and down the command chain.
And I really feel like this is just going back to the central problem of EU4. Not enough spinning plates. You don't have those personalities dictating how the game goes. You have these abstractions, and with so many abstractions, it really does just become Risk with a lot of house rules.
It would really be cool to have, an admiral of somewhat of Nelson's stature with his personality, dictating the way the entire Navy goes. But, gives them something to focus on. Now, speaking of things to focus on, is there too much DLC? I mean, is there room for more? I mean, what do you think of that model?
So, I think my stance on the DLC is somewhat it's somewhat coloured by the way Ubisoft have actually done things. Have you played Rainbow Six Siege? Are you familiar with their business model?
I've played it many years ago. I'm not really familiar with how they're doing it today.
The way they do their content updates is every year you can buy a different season pass, and that will get you access to all of the year's content. And then the next year, you can't buy that anymore. It's just in the game, and just go on with it. Now, the difference there is that there's a progression mechanic to buy the content in the DLC, and a lot of the DLC content is free anyway. But I feel like Paradox could really get a lot of new users interested by making the first few DLC, like Art of War, totally free for new customers.
It's really interesting you bring that up because, I mean, if you're just getting into EU4 and you say, well, maybe I'll get some DLC, one, do you get them all? Do you get one? I mean, if you got to buy them all, it's got to be a couple of $100 at least.
Yeah, I'm just trying to bring that figure up right now. EU4, though, and CK2, Paradox games in general, other than Hearts of Iron 4 and technically Stellaris, have this massive problem with them that the game experience without the DLC just feels so hollow because you see a bunch of mechanics that you're not allowed to play with.
Oh, really? I didn't know that they locked them off. I thought there was some core mechanics that always got updated, but I didn't realize they would kind of gate it off.
You do get some core mechanics that you can play with, and you can see everything going around, but stuff like the diplomatic macro builder added in Mandate of Heaven, you can't use that. And a lot of the ruler personalities, you don't get to interact with those, I think. The Art of War, a lot of that skated away, like the army builder.
Huh. I did not know that. That's interesting. I agree. I wouldn't mind just saying, hey, guess what? Here's $40 for a year, or $30, or whatever you would normally pay to buy 2 DLCs, and then just say, hey, get it. And then if you got to jump in, you can buy the game and get access to the same game everyone else is playing.
Yeah, I've got the page up, by the way, and it's £211.
Well, that's an impressive. I mean, you break it down hour to hour, and I mean, it's probably fairly cheap with the entertainment you get out. But if you've never played the game and you're on the fence, I mean, that's a big number.
That is a very big number. I'm going to say that £70 for that is just the content packs, the sprite packs, and the sound packs. So, but that's still like £130. That's a lot for one game.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, the sound stuff, I know CK2, the one that I did get was, they had the Viking Metal one. I have to say I was really, really impressed with the Viking Metal sound pack.
That was actually really good, and I like what they do with Sabaton. All of the Sabaton music is brilliant.
I'll have to check that out. The Christmas one also feels good, Christmas time too. So they're hitting the right stuff there, and I guess hopefully they keep it up. But yeah, that's but still £130. It's got to be about $160. I mean, that's steep. And then especially to gimp somebody like, hey, guess what? You can just spend $20 and get the base game on sale, but you're not going to get the same game as everybody else.
Yep. Oh, here's one of the more egregious ones. When you can hunt for the 7 cities in the New World with conquistadors, that button's not available to you unless you buy the Eldorado expansion.
Okay, I know I was definitely hunting for that in my last game. So, I just kind of thought, well, it was there, but maybe the events would be a little blander. But that's interesting.
And that actually gives a very big bonus to whoever finds it first. You get a whole bunch of money, a whole bunch of new events that are just beneficial. That's actually kind of like buying power.
Wow, I kind of quit after a point because they were like up in British Columbia wandering around, and I said, well, there's nothing here. I'm done with this.
Yeah, they do a terrible job of really communicating that.
Huh. Well, I guess a little spoiler alert there after the fact, but I'll have to look into it some more next time. Now, do you play multiplayer at all?
I've played quite a bit of multiplayer, not with the Map Goons group, but
okay, yeah.
I've played with a couple friends.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I've watched some of the Map Goons. I've not played with the group. It looks like a whole another layer to add on top to EU4. It looks like a lot of fun, but I just don't have the time commitment, or I kind of feel bad shafting somebody and going sub hunting.
I just don't have the time zone.
Oh, I suppose, yeah. That definitely presents some issues, but it's fun to watch their thread because, I mean, it can be cutthroat, it can be interesting, things can change fast. I mean, it's really cool to see what do they call it, the border gore that can go on. Yeah,
the LP thread that was around for a while, which unfortunately appears to have been cancelled, was
really?
A brilliant read.
Huh. Yeah, I think the only EU4 LP I'm watching right now is Ofalof, where he took from CK2 and then into EU4, and he's done all custom events, custom countries, custom language. It's really been a lot of fun with, I think Gothic Europe is what it is right now.
Well, you actually mentioned that to me, and I've got to say it goes even one step further back with Total War Attila, of all things.
Oh, that's right. He did start from Attila. Yeah, because he was the horde out of Romania or something like that, and sacked Rome. That's right. Yeah, that's cool when stuff like that happens.
Yeah, I'm still trundling my way through that, but I feel like that Let's Play actually shows off one of the better examples of the narrative of EU4. but also
Yeah,
why that's so difficult to actually pull across, because they've had to use a whole bunch of custom events to do it.
yeah, I'm sure there's only one country that would be worth playing in that game, and that's the one he's doing, which makes sense. So I guess you can really see the challenge that Paradox would have to flesh out somebody that says, boy, I want to play Helsinki in a game. I mean, how do you make events for some off-the-wall province in the middle of nowhere?
Yeah, and that actually brings me across to talking about another Let's Player that does a lot of EU4 content, and that is Arumba.
Yeah, I watched some of his videos when I was first getting in, and a lot of people said, "Hey, if you're gonna play Europa Universalis, you got to go watch this guy's videos."
And what actual effect did that have on you coming into EU4 with that?
I watched probably the first 6 episodes. I'm kind of the guy, I would rather just learn the basics and then kind of stumble through it than to say I'm going to watch 120 hours of a tutorial. That's time I could be playing the game. It helped with some of the little things, and especially the flow of the game. Like, oh,
Yeah,
okay, I can click this, I can click that, which a lot of things I just wasn't aware of.
that's probably the biggest deal for me. I always recommend Arumba because Arumba plays super quickly and confidently. But when he thinks about something, he talks through everything with all of the numbers, and he just breaks everything down very neatly whenever he has a stumbling block. And I feel like that is the kind of thought process you need to be able to play EU4. You've got to be confident, and you don't get bogged down until you actually find something that needs to bog you down.
It points out a good fact about a lot of Paradox games that a lot of the times the right decision is to do nothing at all, just to wait, let more time pass.
Yeah, and oftentimes the game is actually a lot simpler than one would expect. You're just marching your dudes into good places for them to fight. You're not necessarily having to manage each individual county and their development levels. That's definitely not a thing in EU4. But with the number of numbers it presents you on your first game, you get the feeling that that is what it's about. And having someone that clearly shows that that is not the goal of EU4 does help a lot with getting into the mentality that Paradox would like you to be in.
Oh, I totally agree. You jump into the game, you pick, say, Portugal, and then you get analysis paralysis. You're throwing a bunch of numbers, and you're like, well, what's important? What's not? Do I focus on this? And then if you're coming from a game like Civilization, you feel like you need to do something, when a lot of the times you really shouldn't do anything because everything's already happening.
Yeah. And actually, I think that's a real big problem that Civilization has needed into the strategy game mentality. That in every turn, you should have a checklist of things to do. So surely in its discrete day-by-day turns or monthly ticks, you should do a whole checklist of things. But EU4 is a game that basically autopilots itself.
Personally, I like that I'm not a big fan of micromanaging. I don't want to feel like I'm the only person with a brain inside of a game. It's kind of cool to be able to say, well, guess what? This country's going to run itself, and I'm just going to make the interesting decisions. Who cares if the county of Ulm is building a new, road system? Let me pick the fun stuff, the battles. I don't want to have to micromanage 87 provinces.
Same, I like to feel as the leader, not the administrator.
That's definitely a good way to put it. Are you a bureaucrat or are you the guy in charge? So yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. So yeah, I mean, if somebody's getting into the game, you pick up the base game. Do you pick up the latest DLC? I mean, do you pick up, get them all on sale at Christmas time? I mean, what's the best way to really roll into it?
There's definitely a list of DLC that is mandatory, like Art of War is number one on that list, and I think Rights of Man comes a close second, and then Conclaves.
Oh, Enclave? Yeah, yeah.
Enclave, yeah, I keep doing that.
Yeah, yeah. With the names so close, especially with the similarities, you can see where that'll happen.
Yeah.
And And then from there, I mean, do you still think Portugal was a good? I mean, is that a place where somebody can jump off?
Portugal, I think, doesn't have enough going for it right at the beginning. You probably get dragged into the 100 Years' War. That's about it for the early game of Portugal, and then you're straight in with colonization. I don't think that's so good. I'd prefer recommending something like France, which has a very directed set of events at the start, and no real focus on naval maneuvering yet, or someone like Spain, which is tremendously powerful right from the beginning.
Yeah, my first playthrough was Portugal, and I found it to be kind of bland. Then I tried the Ottomans, and that was just like a clown car crashed into a dumpster fire. And I learned a lot, but I didn't really enjoy a lot of it.
Well, sounds like you had a much better time than me. I played Ireland.
Ah, yeah, that must have been a quiet little corner of Europe.
I tried to play it like Ireland in CK2, and then I realized I couldn't marry the Queen of England, kill all of her children, and have my child succeed and conquer England that way.
You know, I absolutely have to say I did look and say, well, how do I kill this person in this game? Because you get used to it in CK2.
Yeah, and getting countries into regency councils and getting rid of guys that give a lot of good monarch points is actually something that has been missing from EU4 as a strategy.
Though I guess historically it was fairly rare to see one monarch knocking off another, though it wasn't uncommon, it's just not very often.
Yeah, it's much more of a ruler and vassal type thing, which is why I appreciate Mandate of Heaven so much. Since you've not played Japan, I presume you're not familiar with the seppuku mechanics.
No. Would you talk about it a little bit?
So, seppuku, you can do that to any of your vassal nations, and you can make their daimyo, their leader, have to kill themselves for declaring war on another daimyo.
Oh, wow. So that's one way to get rid of troublesome vassals.
Yep, and I believe you get 3 or 4 or 5 times their monarch points, just straight up, and you force their son to take over. So you can plant a whole bunch of terrible leaders in your daimyo and then conquer them.
Oh, I was about to say, what's the downside here, but I see what it is. The downside is you don't have to deal with them anymore.
The downside is that it increases their liberty desire.
Ah, okay, so you could be fighting revolts all over.
Yeah, but it's only 20%, which I think is a tad low for killing somebody's dad.
Yeah, you think it would be a little higher than that, but hey, I guess whatever floats their boat.
Mm.
So, I mean, where are you hoping that Paradox is going to go next? I mean, now that they've kind of hit Ming and you've got Japan and you have the third Rome with Russia. I mean, where do you think they should focus on next?
Well, they've got the entire globe right now, so how about space? Oh, sorry, no, Solaris is already out.
Unfortunately, I really don't think... I wish Stellaris had a little more depth than it does. I think it needs a few more DLCs.
I would agree. Honestly, though, what I want to see from Paradox is to let go of CK2, stop developing that any further, and put that team onto Victoria 3. I just want Victoria 3 yesterday.
You know, a modern Victoria 3 probably would be pretty cool.
It would, and I feel like the lessons they would learn from a Victoria-style development could really go back into EU4 and Stellaris and help both of those games become what they really could be, with a lot more of its traditional modeling of all sorts of variables, like your demographics.
Oh, absolutely. That's one thing where, especially some of the migration periods that you had, where it'd be cool to see the demographics having a little more of an impact on the path of a nation.
Yeah, you don't really get the feeling of the story of colonization being that of the convicts, the undesirables, or just the religious sects going out there. You don't get the pilgrims. You don't get any of that.
No, and in my latest game, we took over a bunch of English colonies in Mexico, and there just wasn't like all I had was a extra couple 20-30% revolt risk. But other than that, I mean, hey, guess what? Send the missionaries in, and whatever it is, 36 months later, and everybody's happy.
Yeah, you've just got religion, Protestant, culture, English, convert, yes, no.
Yeah. Oh, you want to make this core? Yes. And then eventually you just make them all Castilian. And it just, I don't know, it could be some more there for sure.
Definitely.
Even if it didn't make it easier, it could make it more interesting.
Yeah, and that's something that Mu and Taxes, the mod, really, really delves into, because it lets you have religious minorities in provinces, it lets you have different cultures in provinces, and it models population densities of all of those cultures.
Now I'm going to have to check that out. That sounds like an interesting mod without changing the flavor of the game.
It is fantastic.
Huh. I'll definitely have to look into that. So to jump to the world of odd, I mean, what's your crazy moment in EU4? I guess your gay black Hitler moment where just everything went off the rails.
Now, I believe I told you this when we were talking about doing this podcast, and it was when I accidentally released Granada as a subject. That was intentional. What wasn't intentional was leaving the little tick box on that says, play as released subject.
And how did you do?
Well, I ended up allying with Aragon that was still around, and we ended up reconquering Castile in the name of Granada.
Oh, wow. Which is pretty cool, but it feels a little ahistorical.
Just a tad, and I feel like that would have been... I would have complained about that if I didn't end up getting really cocky, too big for my breeches, and just attacked France. Should not have attacked France.
No, usually anytime you get involved with France, attacking them is kind of a bad idea.
Yeah, especially when they're always allied with the Ottomans, which definitely sounds ahistorical.
Yeah, that is definitely a little bit weird. Now, have you ever jumped into a game like they got the scenario where you can play the War of Independence?
Honestly, no, I've never played with any of the scenario bookmarks.
Okay, I jumped into one not long ago, the War of Independence, and it was kind of neat just to focus on that one area, but it seemed like it was more of a military simulator than boy, you've got a lot of interesting options, because the time frame was so short.
Are there a bunch of events for that?
Yeah, I mean, there was events that popped up, and you're still moving your armies around, but it just didn't have quite that same flair like when you've got 100 years to work up to in some big event.
And does it cut off when the war ends?
I didn't get to that point. I kind of hit a stalemate point, and then it just wasn't terribly fun anymore, and then that was that.
That's a real shame, because if that was good, I'd actually just retire that old Koei game as my War of Independence simulation and go to EU4.
I mean, I'll definitely try it again. I didn't have enough time to really play through it as much as I would have liked, because there isn't really a good, War of Independence, War 1812 game out there.
There is only one, and it's an old Koei simulation for the Super Nintendo.
Oh, yeah. If you're still nursing a Super Nintendo, it must be a good game.
Hey, Pacific Theater of Operations 2 is the greatest grog game of all time. War in the Pacific, be damned.
Wow, that is some fighting words, and you might have to fistfight Belugan over that one, but we'll definitely have to leave that for another show. Now, let's see here. What did I want to cover else next? So, I mean, when do you stop? I mean, when you've met your objective, I mean, do you wait till your computer's at 100% CPU, or do you just wait till you get bored?
Well, the way I play EU4 is I always play it listening to a podcast or a long YouTube video or something. So I always play in like 1 to 3 hour bursts, once, twice, maybe 3 times a week if it's a good week. And so either I'm doing an Iron Man run and an update comes out and I can't play it anymore without reverting, or I just get bored.
Yeah, I've kind of found the same thing. I usually explore all the kind of interesting places. I expand where it's easy, and then I hit a wall where, now I have to go to war with France. And I know the pace of the game will suddenly slow as I try to wrestle this monster of a giant and try to, at least take a province or two. But I know once I go down that road, it's just going to happen again and again and again. And that's like, well, I've kind of gotten where I want to get, and I'll just go play somebody else from the start.
Yeah. And the biggest issue with going to war with a major power like France is getting to mark provinces as of interest to you. And then your allies siege down the one province you wanted to take, and they don't want to give that province back to you. They don't want to release the siege to you. They want it for themselves, and you can't ask for it. And if you're on an Iron Man save, you've just been screwed completely.
Yeah, now you've got to work at a totally different game to steal it from your allies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that just kind of feels like a bummer. So yeah, I definitely agree with you there. But I know it's a game that when I first bought it, I really kind of had a hard time getting into it. I said, well, what's the big draw? And then there was like one day that it just clicked. And the next thing I knew, it's like, man, I had some serious hours into it.
For me, it's always worked because I always saw it as what it really is, and that is a marvelous Skinner box where every day you see those nice numbers ticking through, and you have, at the end of the month, all of your numbers popping out of your provinces, and it's just a quest to make those numbers bigger and bigger.
Yeah, what did you call it? Your historical cookie clicker?
Yep.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. It is cool to watch, and the first few years you're struggling with 3 to 5 ducats a month, and then you hit the mid 1700s and you're pulling in 60 or 80 ducats a month.
And then you're paying back 100 ducats a month in interest because you bit too much into France. You had to hire a whole bunch of mercenaries to deal with some rebels. Your overextension is through the roof. You're behind on tech for a while. Oh crap, we've got to go quickly, start another war to make our numbers even bigger. And then the whole cycle repeats itself.
Oh yeah. It's funny you mentioned the military tech and the mercenaries. When I got into a little tit with England, I was at level 18 on my military tech, and they were level 23. And it was unbelievable how bad I got stomped, even with a ridiculous amount of soldiers. So it was pretty interesting to see that technology feel like, oh yeah, I paid a heavy price, just like I should have.
But my issue with that is that it never communicates itself. For example, when you see an army marching, you don't know that's a tech level 23 army. You have to click on the nation and see their tech level. And that's especially relevant for native factions. Like, you're fighting the Aztecs. You don't know what tech they're on just by marching in. You've got to go into different menus for that. And you see them on the map, and you just see little native men with spears. Oh, turns out same tech level as you.
That is a good point, and I did run into that when I started getting stomped, because it was like, well, hold on, what's going on here? Why am I getting beat so badly? And like you said, you click on the unit, and it doesn't tell you what their tech level is, and you think there would be a reconnaissance or something where if you've got a good amount of cavalry, they should be able to out and give you an estimate of who you're fighting, instead of having to click on diplomacy of all things to figure out they've got flintlocks.
Oh, hey, I think you're describing another mechanic that was done better in Victoria too.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, you can have different kinds of cavalry, and dragoons, I think, are especially good at reconnaissance, which gives you more tactics and gives you more information on the enemy.
That would be cool. Instead of it just being this linear, race from, basic cavalry up to, whatever you're at your tech level, to have a reason to maybe stick with the previous one. Or maybe you want to wait to upgrade until you get to this other thing that gives you some other bonus.
Or different doctrines that add in your formations. Like, for example, going from musket lines to the tercio.
Yeah, definitely. It would definitely add another layer to the combat that, maybe you want to stick with something else or keep your cannons a different way or just focus on one spot just for that particular benefit.
Yeah, I've never felt the benefit of things like the British fighting square against French cavalry. I've only seen the benefit of Tech 19 versus Tech 18.
Yeah, which is kind of a bummer because, in an era of technological advance, especially in combat, especially the Tercio, that was huge at that period of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully that's one of them things in future DLC, especially if they're taking a more combat-oriented focus, we can see a little more depth there.
I don't know. I don't think the framework of EU4 as it is can actually support a doctrine. They never worked that in from the ground up, and it would feel really tacked on if they did, even though it would be such an important thing to add.
And I suppose, like you mentioned with some of the other mechanics, you're going to figure out what the best thing is, and then the interesting decision is done.
Yep, you don't really get the choice of specialization versus upgrading. Like with Hearts of Iron 4, one of the things they really bigged up was your production lines getting bigger and better at doing what they do. So do you take the Panzer II off the lines when you can churn out 5 of them in exchange for 1 Panzer IV? Well, of course, Panzer IV is higher on the tech tree.
Yeah. It's just, sure, you have less of them, but they're so much better, and some turbo nerd ran the numbers in Excel, and he knows exactly how many you should have.
Yep.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but well, that's how it goes. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about here, Herp? We're kind of just past the hour mark, so I don't want to take it on too much longer and take up too much more of your time, but I didn't know if there's any other things you'd like to hit on.
My only real closing thing to throw in is that I feel like EU4 is a strange halfway house of design philosophies between the CK2 and Victoria 2 spectrums, and I'm not sure what it is about it that attracts so many people. I don't know what it is that makes it good. I'm not sure what it is that makes it compelling. But there's something there, even though it mechanically is lesser than the 2 other varieties of historical, 3 now, with Hearts of Iron 4 coming back, varieties of paradox strategy game. It's just kind of there in the middle, and yet it's probably the biggest and most celebrated of them all. I don't get it, but I'm one of the people that love it still. So I guess it's just something that nobody gets, and we all just accept.
I would definitely agree. I still love CK2, but there's something about just sitting down with EU4, popping up a nation, and I got a 7-year-old boy that even he enjoys sitting down and looking at the map, and more, not so looking at the numbers, but there's just something about looking at a good map with your little guys moving around and feel like you're just building your own nation.
Yep, it really is just simple enough, accessible enough, but with enough perceived depth to keep you playing for hundreds of hours.
Yeah, absolutely, and it doesn't look like Aurora on Earth instead of Aurora 4X. Well, hey, Herb, I think we're going to call it at that. I think we've hit a lot of really good points, and we had some great conversation. I don't want to get too long in the tooth on the podcast, so I really appreciate you being on today, man, and I really hope we can have you back again in the future and discuss some other games.
I appreciate you having me on.
Well, wonderful, Herb. Well, hey, thanks again, and to all the listeners, thank you for listening to episode number 2 of the Strategy Gamer podcast. Feel free to head over to TheStrategyGamer.com and get a link to our Discord, where you two can talk about bad games with us on our Discord, or just link cat videos or whatever it may be. And at that, you have yourself a wonderful day, evening, weekend, or holiday.